A lost generation of late-diagnosed autistic adults is finally aging into their 60s and 70s, and right now, many are watching their daily routines blur into confusion, facing an isolating cognitive decline that the medical system is failing to catch. Data from over 25 million healthcare records shows the rate of early-onset dementia in autistic adults is 4 times higher than neurotypical peers. When crossing the 65-year threshold, the prevalence rate in older autistic adults jumps past 30%. Meanwhile, our medical diagnostic infrastructure is almost entirely calibrated for children. We know exactly how to screen toddlers for early developmental milestones, but we lack the clinical tools to evaluate those same individuals in old age. A pediatric-focused medical system ignores the final stages of the autistic lifespan, leaving elder symptoms unread and untreated until they reach a point of total collapse. Look at this clinical evaluation criteria for dementia.
These standard tests are built to measure neurotypical cognitive decline, looking for specific markers like generalized episodic memory loss or a tendency to physically wander. When older autistic adults take these clinical tests, they often score perfectly fine, yet they report severe cognitive failures and extreme distress in their daily lives. Researchers document this as the mismatch phenomenon. Clinicians frequently look at those passing test scores and dismiss the patient's self-reported decline, diagnosing the distress as just a flare-up of baseline anxiety or depression. Standard memory tests miss the mark here because they assume a neurotypical brain architecture. The autistic brain operates on a different attention system entirely. To actually spot neurodegeneration in autistic adults, the medical system has to abandon its neurotypical baselines. Clinicians need to recognize a cognitive framework known as monotropism. A neurotypical mind is generally polytropic, like a wide, diffuse lamp illuminating multiple cues at once. The autistic mind is monotropic. The light narrows into an intense laser spotlight, allocating all cognitive resources into a singular focus. This architecture creates distinct functional advantages. It allows for deep flow states, capacity for extreme hyperfocus, and the pursuit of intense passions with incredible expertise. But there is an external sensory trade-off. Any stimulus caught inside that narrow attention beam is experienced with overwhelming intensity. There is also an internal trade-off involving interoception, the ability to sense internal bodily signals. Because the attention spotlight is pointed outward, the brain often misses internal alarms, like hunger, thirst, or pain. Autistic adults rely on this intense attention tunnel as their primary engine for self-regulation and environmental navigation. When neurodegeneration sets in, that specific architecture comes under siege. As this creeping dark shadow spreads, the disease actively dismantles the monotropic system. The brain loses its ability to achieve restorative flow states. This strips the individual of their primary mechanism for nervous system regulation. Without that intense focus to filter inputs, sensory and interoceptive barriers collapse. The person loses the ability to block out painful background noise or recognize when they need to use the restroom. Natural autistic inertia, the normal resistance to changing tasks, degrades into extreme rigidity. Simple environmental changes or daily transitions begin to feel like an active destruction of their safety. When dementia attacks a monotropic mind, the patient rarely presents as mildly forgetful. They often appear trapped in a state of constant sensory and emotional agony. Standard non-pharmacological interventions for dementia lean heavily on group socializing and busy multi-sensory activities to keep patients engaged. Watch what happens when you force those polytropic activities onto a monotropic brain with shrinking cognitive reserves. The bombardment of sensory inputs, these pulsing arrows, triggers severe distress, not healing. Caregivers and medical professionals have to stop applying neurotypical social expectations to neurodivergent patients experiencing cognitive decline. Effective care requires adapting the environment to the patient's failing monotropic system, rather than punishing them for failing to adapt to a chaotic environment. Connection can be maintained by leaning into the patient's specific interests. These deep passions act as a bridge, triggering gamma synchrony,
a specific brainwave state that binds sensory information together and reconnects neural networks that would otherwise remain offline. Care must prioritize sensory simplification, stripping the environment of background noise and visual clutter while enforcing strict routines reduces the cognitive energy required to process the room. They also require proactive interoceptive support. Caregivers must manage the patient's hydration, nutrition, and restroom needs on a strict schedule. Because the patient's internal physical alarms are completely offline, the caregiver has to act as their external body sensor. By respecting the unique architecture of the monotropic mind, we can abandon broken diagnostic molds. We can provide an aging, lost generation with the dignity and specialized safety they deserve.